Hey, all, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It's our exciting day here when we talk about the news around here on the podcast, and we're glad to have you all aboard. It's January 31st and a Monday, and that means we get to share about what we think matters in the news. We like to call this Common Good News, and some days it feels real common good news, and some other days, like today, we're going to talk about how do we think about the news and where do we get our news and how does our news go and roll and all the rest of it. Dan, good to see you today.
Likewise, yeah. Still digging ourselves out from the winter weather here in northern Indiana.
Is that so? I'm trying to get our YouTube channel going live here. Trying to point at it. I don't know. It says it's waiting. I don't know what that is. But hey, friends, if you listen to this on Facebook live feed or on Twitter or on Twitch or even over on Instagram when we finally get that one up and going today, and you haven't yet been to our YouTube channel, please do. Head over to Vote Common Good on YouTube. Just subscribe to the channel. We need to get to a certain magic number so that we can have a whole lot of other abilities and resources and assets available to us around there. So please, if you could, find your way over there, and we'd love to have you.
Yeah. But yeah, we want to talk about the news today, and specifically like how we get our news and what the news does to us. I don't know if you deal with this, but you see headlines about things like Ukraine and potentially World War III, and you get a little anxious looking at the headlines. And what do you do with all this information of all the troubles all around the world all the time?
You know, long ago, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, we were all talking about what it means to live in the information society. In fact, I've written 5 books about information society and inventive age and all these things. And it's clear that decades ago, we moved into an arena where we're going to have more information than anyone could ever dream to access or to understand. And with all information comes some wrong information. And with all right information and wrong information, there comes like information that has another agenda to it, anxiety producing information or relief information. And then there's a thing called misinformation. That's become a new phrase that a lot of people like to banny about. And we're going to talk a bit about that today. And that's going to, of course, when you talk about misinformation, you can't do that without talking about the Trump administration, the Trump failure, then the Trump insurrection, and then the Trump possible rerun, all of which we'll have to address again today, and other outlets, including what's big in the news right now, which is Joe Rogan and Spotify and what happens with all of that. Look, it's a little complicated. I just want to start by saying this, Dan. Some people produce news that's intention is to produce anxiety. I feel like that's what's going on with Ukraine. I mean, the number of Americans that are worried about what's going on in Ukraine. Look, I'm worried for Ukrainians, but there are people who are like on pins and needles because they're hearing that, you know, we're going to go to war with Russia. We're not going to war with Russia. Biden has said it. Everyone has said it. You don't go to war over a situation like this. This isn't the Gulf War. This isn't Kuwait and Iraq. It's a totally different scene. But man, maybe it's a void of news coverage or something else, but the level of attention that this is getting just seems to me to be over the top. Yeah. And it seems like it's designed to produce anxiety.
Yeah, and anxiety sells. It gets clicks, it gets restreams, it gets shares. So that's part of the issue, is that good news, while it might make you feel good, doesn't get the same level of engagement on social media and all the rest. So
yeah, that's right.
Anxiety producing stuff feeds the algorithm.
Yeah, and we're guilty of it too, right? Always every day we think about what's our headline for this, so that it produces a video post and an Instagram post and a Facebook and Twitter and
caught
Twitch
up
post.
In the ecosystem. Yeah.
Absolutely. You want to do something that grabs people's attention, that feels like it's where they are and feels like what they're thinking. So we've always got that going on. And I'm being dismissive of the Ukrainian situation because it just seems like this is all in the workings of Vladimir Putin and the Russian government and what they're wanting the outcome to be. And everybody's just being pulled along by these strings. And I wish we'd just settle this back a bit and stop cause. Now, again, if you're in Ukraine, that's a totally different story, and we have to talk about it. But I'm just saying that a lot of people's anxiety is not for the Ukrainians. It's
how is this going to affect me? Yeah.
Yes. And of course, in politics, which we talk about a lot around here, because we want people to make the common good their voting criteria, they're always having a political perspective on this stuff. Fair enough. Then there's this other category of misinformation. Seems to me that misinformation needs to be distinguished from just wrong information. The difference, as I understand
contradictory information.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, contradictory information or incomplete information. Like there's all of these. I sort of put it in the category of the difference between someone lying to you and someone saying something to you that's inaccurate or doesn't match the facts or is untrue. Now, not to be, a 19-year-old back in a philosophy class at the college that I went to and having to argue about the moralities of lying. It seems to me that a lie requires a couple of components to it. It requires intention to deceive. It requires a person who rightfully deserves information, and then a person who holds the information somebody else rightfully deserves. I have to have all three of those components in place for something to be a lie. So if you ask me my opinion about something, well, an opinion is not a fact, and you and I have no right to share my opinion with you, and I have no obligation to share an opinion with you that is true and accurate. So if you ask me, hey, do you think my beard looks good? How do you think my hair is? I might answer that question in a whole variety of ways just to help you have a good day. That's really not about my opinion. There's no deal that we have that I share with you accurately every opinion that I have about something. But there's other times where somebody asks you some information and there's an obligation that you have. Let's say I'm your hairstylist and we have a deal and we have an agreement, and I'm going to produce your hairstyle so that you can go be in a public space, and that's going to be part of your work life. And you say to me, how does my hair look? And I'm like, Dan, it looks great today. I know it doesn't. I know it doesn't complete what you wanted to do with your hairstyle. Now we have a different relationship, right? So you would expect from me to give you the information that's not just my opinion, but that's actually related to some kind of an agreement we have. And if I intentionally mislead you, if I think, you know what, I want Dan to do poorly in his public appearance, so I'm going to tell him his hair looks great because he can't see the back. And when he gets out there, this is going to ruin his life, right? That's a level of misinformation that has some intention around it that's supposed to cause somebody some sort of harm. So lying always requires someone to have information that another person has the right to, and that they deliver wrong information in order to produce an outcome that the person wouldn't want if they had the right information. This is the difference between, your child lying to you and another neighborhood kid lying to you, right? The other neighborhood kid may have no obligation to tell you something that's true. They can answer any way that they want, but your own child, you have a relationship that requires it. And so the intent to deceive, the same thing with misinformation. Look, with all the information that goes out in the world on so many levels, people are going to say things that are just inaccurate and wrong. But if you say things that are inaccurate and wrong, knowing that they are inaccurate and wrong to an audience that has as an expectation that you're telling them right information, and you're telling them wrong information because you want a different outcome to take place, that's what we call misinformation. So what do we do in this ecosystem we live in where some people truly believe things that are wrong? And they share those things, right? They truly believe that the parents of the Sandy Hook murders were all actors and no kids were killed. They truly 100% believe that, and they share it. Now, that's not misinformation. It's wrong information. It's untrue. The person probably should not be listened to and followed. What if that same person, and I think of Alex Jones in this case, knows that it's not true, and what he's trying to do is use this fictional story to cause another outcome, so he's intentionally misleading? That's then misinformation. And in our society, we have to differentiate between things that are inaccurate and wrong and things that are intended to mislead. right?
Yeah.
I think this is where it lies. And we're always frustrated whenever opinions that we don't agree with are given a platform and are adhered to by other people, and we feel the frustration. And especially when you feel like there's more people listening to information that's incorrect than information that's correct. But if we don't suss out the difference between the intentionality between sharing wrong information and the unintentionality, I think we're really in trouble. I think we have to distinguish between those things.
And there seems to be too an attempt at covering this. Like, I'm not saying this is what I believe. I'm just asking a question.
Yeah.
And this whole like muddying the waters by giving voice to conspiracy theories or, false information, but you're not endorsing it. You're just talking about it. You're just wondering out loud if maybe Trump is still the president and Joe Biden is a puppet. Like
that's right. I'm not saying it's true, but maybe, yeah, look, and that gets difficult, right? Because that's a rhetorical trick, right? I've done this my entire adult life, had to be in conversations with people that I disagree with and trying to say like, hey, it's worthy to have a conversation about opinions that differ from your own in order to have those out. I hope we do this on this podcast. I hope we do it in all the work that we do around Vote Common Good. I hope that's common work that we do, that we don't assume that only the majority opinion is correct. That would be foolhardy. There's nothing in our history, there's nothing in our current situation, and I'm guessing there's going to be nothing in our future that would tell you listening to the majority opinion on every issue is the best way to determine if it's accurate and true or not. That's just not the way it goes, right? That's not how information changes and moves itself around. But when someone believes that a piece of information is erroneous, and they don't share that they believe it's erroneous, and they platform it as if it's perhaps accurate, and then they step back and give no critique to it at all, then you're in a place where you're starting to use contrary beliefs that you don't hold in some other way. Now, all of this sort of leads me to Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Right? Joe Rogan is the current example of this. I'm not even suggesting somehow that Joe Rogan, who's a comedian and ultimate fighter commentator and has the #1 podcast in America right now, I'm not at all suggesting that Joe Rogan is the greatest offender of all of this. I don't even know that he is. I just know that because he has the most listened to podcast, because he's paid $100 million this year to put his podcast on the Spotify platform, that has now elevated Joe Rogan to a different role in the media ecosystem, right? So he has a different set of responsibilities. The place you speak from the perch that you speak, these things all really matter. Of course, we all know that, right? The private conversations you have, the conversations you have if you know that a small group of people are listening, those are different than the things that you would say in public and in these public spaces. Joe Rogan, to give him what I think is credit that he's due, is trying to figure out how to deal with this new platform. He posted a video on Instagram yesterday or the day before, 10 minutes, sort of talking about this big controversy that's come up because so many of his guests, or enough of his guests and enough of his own comments, and I think this is crucially important, when he said, look, if you're young and healthy, you don't need the vaccine. That kind of advice is wrong, bad, anti-science advice. Maybe it's his opinion, but it's wrong enough that has a consequence that people should say, hey, that's a bad piece of advice. Now, someone shouldn't be removed from a platform or shouldn't be able to not have a podcast on Spotify, even if you're paid $100 million for your podcast on Spotify, just for being wrong. Fair enough for being wrong. He can be wrong. But then when he contracted COVID this last September, he's on there like, but then I took ivermectin and that's what made me better. We know that's not what made him better. He might believe that, but now you start to build a case in which, hey, he's now saying things and people are listening to him that start to feel really dangerous. Then he has guests on who believe things and are saying things that are contrary to their own industries or to their own groups. In one case, a medical doctor, in another case, a philosopher, that don't match the most of the information. And rather than that being talked about as a fringe view that could be wrong, and because it's wrong could be dangerous, he sort of lets it lay out there. Mm-hmm. So all of this stuff is kind of nuanced, right? The thing that you that you appreciate and say, boy, you're really raising a great point here, versus the stuff that you're saying like, hey, I hear that that's your opinion. I know a lot of people have that opinion, but I got to tell you, I think that opinion might have some real negative consequences to it. So much of misinformation, and look, people who work in the areas of misinformation, they know the way you deliver misinformation is not to go out loud, just to be out loud and say to people things that are wrong. That's not an effective misinformation campaign. It's not even an effective information campaign, saying to people things that are right. It's more artful than that. And this is what Joe Rogan is guilty of. And I don't think he recognizes that this is what he's guilty of. And we're gonna play an audio clip here in a minute that I was really struck by from this video that he put out yesterday, where he tries to explain why he's struggling with this. And I think it really captures the dilemma that a lot of us feel that we're in, the difference between wrong information and misinformation.
Yeah, and the difference between trying to offer up contrarian views that might help us all to see something more clearly. Like that's how science progresses, by testing ideas with other ideas. But the difference between doing that in a group of scientists and just using your platform to make guesses about how COVID works, I think is a big difference. But let's you want to follow?
Yeah, and I just want to note here that there's good conversation going on in one of the social media chats that we can see here. And Barbara and Trisha and Mike are making some good points. Mike is saying that misinformation might be just incorrect and disinformation is intended to mislead. I make a slight distinction between those. For me, misinformation is not, it has a level of intentionality to it. Disinformation has an entire campaign around it. I think we have to distinguish between something like Joe Rogan saying stuff on a podcast that runs 3 to 4 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and the Trump administration or other governments putting out intentional campaigns of disinformation. So I think on scale and from where they come is what distinguishes misinformation from disinformation, and what distinguishes wrong information from misinformation has a level of intentionality. Yeah. And I think the frustration is not, hey, of course Joe Rogan said some stuff one time on a podcast that wasn't accurate and they figured that out and he's like, yeah, so that was wrong. That's not the point. Mm-hmm. No one's accusing someone of saying like, if you don't get every single word right, every single claim that you make has to be backed up. That's not what's going on. There's a style and a preponderance of information that's going out. And I think that's where the trouble comes. Look, Neil Young, who's removed his music from Spotify, and then Joni Mitchell, and maybe now the Foo Fighters and other people that are going to do this. It's not because they think, oh, Joe Rogan said something once. This is not some cancel culture, gotcha, go back and find some fact and show that someone's wrong and then remove them for being wrong. That's not what it is. It's an entire perspective, from advice that you give. If you're young and healthy, you don't need to have the vaccine, to when I got vaccine, I took this ivermectin, even though the FDA says it doesn't work. I'm telling you that it did work for me, to here's a person that's been banned from other social media because their content they're putting out around COVID has been determined to be dangerous. Like, that's not just, I got something wrong. That feels like a level of commitment to moving information that is not entirely accurate, or better yet, you should know. And that sometimes your lack of hard work on finding out if it's true or not, which is part of what Joe Rogan said in his video piece that he put out.
Is and part of the issue. Unwillingness to admit that you got something wrong when new facts arise.
Or the thing that you allowed someone to share is dangerously wrong.
Yeah.
Look, nobody is talking here about censorship from the government. Spotify has a statement out saying we're very concerned about the level to which we critique or control our content providers. They should be. There's a range of things that we know would be dangerous for people to share that we would not allow people to share, right? Just do the thought experiment yourself. Like, ask yourself, what is something that you know some people believe that would not be you would not be able to share it appropriately in a publicly supported, ad-driven, subscription-based platform? Like if Nazi kinds of propaganda from the 1930s, or if anti-mixed marriage messages from the United States in the 1960s, or if attack the Capitol on January 6th, 2023 comments were out, people would say, yeah, look, I understand there's people who still hold to all those views, but we're not going to just allow you to just say, well, some people really believe that the Holocaust was necessary, or some people really believe that black people and white people are not equal and therefore should not be able to be married in this country, or we should attack the Capitol on the anniversary because that's what good patriots do. No, what we would say is, yes, of course, people believe those things. Yes, those are argued on the internet everywhere, but they're not the kinds of things that are reasonable enough to be in this arena.
Yeah.
Now, this is the question about the stuff Joe Rogan has said. Is it determined to be reasonable enough to be in the public dialogue still? Not saying that someone should or shouldn't hold it, or can't hold it. That's a separate conversation. Should the platforms that he's on be espousing this? Would he choose to be espousing it? Or is it so far out of line that nobody would, that it's just not right and good and healthy? So you do your own thought experiment. I think you realize everybody has things they're not going to want to share, right? You know, not to be crass or anything, but there are whole communities that believe that pedophilia is a good thing, right? If you don't know that, that's true. There are, and they're out recruiting other people to be part of it. But no one's going to have those people on their regular old podcasts. They shouldn't. That's just a view that is outside of what should be considered normative. With all the conversations about heteronormativity when it comes to gender and sexuality and age relationships, we've decided as a society that stuff, that's not going to pass. We're not going to just say, you know what, I just like to have good conversations with people. You know what I do here? I just talk to people about things that they believe. And sometimes I talk to people who think differently than I do. And well, here's somebody who thinks differently about, you know, adults and children sexually. No, you're not having that conversation in most platforms like a Spotify or Podbean or YouTube or any of these other places. It's a danger when you do, and it's harmful to people. So we all know there's content you're not going to talk about. So let's not have this like you either shut everything down or you let everything go. Yeah. Nobody is suggesting that.
There's a line somewhere everyone agrees.
And where is this on the spectrum of the line?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we should argue about where the line is. I'm not saying we shouldn't argue about where the line is. I'm just saying there's a line, as you put it so well without all the yelling. So thank you, Dan, for just putting it well without all the yelling. All right, so here's this bit Joe Rogan does on his podcast, on his video on Instagram. I'd suggest that you watch the whole thing if you're at all interested in this, just so you can say, I heard it myself. Okay, we'll just play it and then I'll tell you about the other stuff that he says. One.
The problem I have with the term misinformation, especially today, is that many of the things that we thought of as misinformation just a short while ago are now accepted as fact. Like, for instance, 8 months ago, if you said, if you get vaccinated, you can still catch COVID and you can still spread COVID, you would be removed from social media. They would ban you from certain platforms. Now, that's accepted as fact. If you said, I don't think cloth masks work, you would be banned from social media. Now, that's openly and repeatedly stated on CNN. If you said, I think it's possible that COVID-19 came from a lab, you'd be banned from many social media platforms. Now, that's on the cover of Newsweek. All of those theories that at one point in time were banned, were openly discussed by those two men that I had on my podcast that have been accused of dangerous misinformation.
Okay, so here's the thing. This little rhetorical trick. The problem I have with the term is that it's, okay, first of all, that whole business.
Yeah, that's a distraction to the actual conversation.
Back to the 19-year-old in the philosophy class. And this is a classic, unfortunately, in my view, this is a classic Joe Rogan thing. He did the same thing with race when he was talking with Jordan Peterson, someone who I know personally and have thought highly of. When they're like, the problem I have with the term black when it comes to race is yada, yada, yada. This little play of the problem I have with the term, the problem I have with the idea, and then you say a bunch of nonsense that follows it. You're not just critiquing the term. You're trying to say that whole arena, using color as a reference for race or using misinformation as a phrase and a category for talking about proper responsibility in media. You're trying to say that you're trying to dismiss that whole notion. What Joe Rogan doesn't do, and granted, it's not what he's trying to do in his 10-minute podcast, a 10-minute video. Maybe he'll do it on his podcast. Is he doesn't say, here's what I think would be a better alternative than the term misinformation. So first of all, this whole here's what I don't get about misinformation is just, it's so 19-year-old philosophy class rhetoric. It just drives me bonkers. Yeah. But on a larger point, the three things that he mentioned that he says 8 months ago, if you had said these things, you would have been kicked off social media. No, you would not. No, you wouldn't. The three things were breakthrough cases after vaccination, the efficacy of cloth masks, and the origin of the COVID virus. None of those things would you be removed from any social media platform for talking about them, because they're all factually true. Now, some people may have said, get the vaccine, there'll be no breakthrough cases, but no scientists, nobody who delivered the vaccine, nobody who developed or advocated for the vaccine was saying there will be zero breakthrough cases.
Right.
No one was saying if you get the vaccine, you can't spread it. And so anyone saying, hey, if you get the vaccine, you're still going to be contagious and you still could contract the virus, that is the standard information. It was never considered misinformation. That he can't distinguish between that and ivermectin, that he can't distinguish between that and the Dr. Maloney had on saying that the United States now is in a mass hysteria, hypnotized like the Nazis were, that those things are not the same.
Right.
And this is why when you say the problem I have with the concept of misinformation is now you're going to say misinformation doesn't exist. All information that's out there in the world is equal, just like the stuff we used to think. Last Friday, when we had this scientist segment on with astrophysicist and pastor and author Paul Wallace, we were talking about how back in the late 1800s, the United States medical establishment did not believe in germs. Mm-hmm. They did in Europe. They didn't in the United States. They ultimately changed their official opinion and believed in germs. So yes, there are times when the medical establishment gets things profoundly and dangerously wrong. Of course, you should always have alternative views out there. But his three examples that he says, this is my problem with COVID misinformation, is here's three examples that would have gotten you banned from social media. And these are the things that the guests I had on were banned from social media for. That is not true. That is not why they were banned, for saying that there's breakthrough cases or saying that cloth masks don't work. From the day we said in April of 2020 as a nation, we should start masking up, people were saying from the NIH to the FDA, a cloth mask is better than no mask, but it's nowhere close to being an N95 mask. Remember, right. That's when we couldn't get N95 masks. And till this very day, they say, if you want to be the most safe, a cloth mask is not your best option. An N95 mask is your best masking option. A cloth mask is better, but not at all good enough.
Mm-hmm.
That has been the most common. No one, I'm really ranting now, has ever been kicked off of social media for saying cloth masks don't work. Of course they're not, because that's a reasonable argument to make. The difference between cloth masks don't work and we should not have mask mandates, that's
there's a vast chasm in between those two statements. And
finally, while I yell my brains out here, that it was started in a lab is not something you get kicked off social media for. There are ongoing investigations about the origins of COVID, and one of the live options still is that it came from a lab, either accidentally or intentionally. That's still an open question. No one is kicked off of social media for this. So when Joe Rogan says, hey, I'm really sorry that, I've caused all this trouble, which he says in the video, and I'm going to do much better, and I'm going to do more research on the topics, the controversial topics that I talk about, because as he says in the video, I often have people on my show who I think have interesting points, and I don't know what we're going to talk about until we start talking, and we just start talking. He says, now, when it's on these issues, maybe we need to do this a little bit differently. Okay, well, good for you. But if you believe that misinformation, what goes in the misinformation category is breakthrough vaccines, cloth masks, and the origins of COVID, you're not really understanding that those are not the same as mass hysteria, ivermectin, healthy people don't need vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if he just truly doesn't know and understand it. But and in some ways, I'm not even talking about Joe Rogan here, right? Like, this is not a Joe Rogan bash. If you listen to Joe Rogan, fair enough, fine. Because after Joe Rogan, there's going to be somebody else, and there already are somebody else's out there. And so this is not about Joe Rogan. Mm-hmm. This is about this concept of wrong information versus misinformation. And it's as if, because I have a lot of friends that say to me, well, remember when they said we shouldn't wear masks, like in March of 2020, and now we're supposed to wear masks? We can't know. These people aren't trustworthy, right?
Who can know anything?
Who can know anything? I mean, there's no such thing as misinformation. We're all just going to share our stuff. Now, look, if Joe Rogan if people had been like, here's what's interesting on Joe Rogan's podcast, if this is how the story went. Joe Rogan had like 4 or 5 people on, and his own opinion about vaccines are that you don't need them if you're a healthy guy and eat right like him, or if you've got some, horse tranquilizer pills around, then you're actually going to be fine. So sure, he believes that. But, he has this long list of people on who are really helping people understand how the vaccine has come about. Like, he has spent an equal amount of effort supporting the ideas of masking up and social distancing and shutting down certain sectors of our society and having vaccines, all things that we've had to do at various times. Like, he's not on one side or the other. Do you have any friends that listen to Joe Rogan's podcast and say to you, I think the guy comes down pretty even on this thing? No, he is clearly on the side of, we're overdoing it on these vaccines. Masks are really not that big of a deal, and there's alternatives to what the health and the science community are telling you. That's his point. Over all of it, because even in his little video, he says, I did have Sanjay Gupta on, and he talked about this, and he did say I had one other scientist on. Okay, so you're like 2 for 2, a couple of guys who have been removed from social media for saying things that are dangerously inaccurate and should know better because they're actually medical professionals. Like, I promise you that Dr. Malone and the other person whose name I've now forgotten, who were removed from social media, and because they were removed from social media, Joe Rogan put them on his podcast, which is what he says. Because you were removed, I want to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
The reason they were removed is not because simply the things they said, but because they were trying to utilize their position of authority as scientists and medical professionals in order to pass along this information. So social media platforms, all media platforms, are always looking at the context, I guess, is the long and short of it.
Which brings us to the master of misinformation, Donald Trump. And his consistent push of the big lie that the election was rigged, etc., led a whole bunch of people to storm the Capitol, and now 700 plus people have been indicted and are going to trial for a bunch of different crimes committed at the Capitol. But Trump came out and said if I run and if I win, he said, referring to the 2024 presidential election, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. We will treat them fairly. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons because they are being treated so unfairly, end quote. So here's an example of misinformation or disinformation. It was an intentional campaign to push this big lie, had real world consequences, and now 700 plus people are being tried for crimes. But maybe there's a get out of jail free card waiting for them.
I mean, look, the classic gaslighting that this is, and if you don't know the meaning of that phrase, it was this phrase from back when we had gas lamps and a husband would try to make the wife seem like the wife was losing her mind by slowly turning the gas down on the light so it was getting dimmer and dimmer and saying, no, it's not getting any dimmer, and lying to her by turning down the amount of gas. That's what gaslighting phrase comes from, is the intentional misleading of someone while you're changing the conditions, misleading them about the conditions that you're in control of and changing. So what Trump is doing here is often referred to, in the colloquial phrase of gaslighting, meaning he's now going out holding a rally. This was on Saturday, standing up in front of people and saying, I'm on the side of the people who attacked the Capitol. And they're being treated unfairly for what's happening here. They're going to have to be pardoned. Well, you know who he's talking about here. He's talking about Michael Flynn, and he's talking about Roger Stone, and he's maybe talking about his own kids. Maybe he's talking about Mark Meadows, his former chief of staff. That's who he's really. You think he's really talking about the QAnon guy? You think that's the guy that he's really worried
shaman.
about? The shaman? Yeah. No, he's not talking about the shaman. No, he's not talking about that guy from northern Minnesota who he and his 20-year-olds, sons in their 20s, attacked the Capitol and are going to go to prison for it. That's not who he's talking about. He's talking about the people he knows that are being treated unfairly, as if they're the people who've done the right things. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, he has made a choice that he's not running. This is my read. He's made a choice that he's not running for president. So he is going to fully land on the side of the small segment of society who believes that what happened at the Capitol was a righteous act and it was overblown by the actions of a few. And the righteous act was to try to stop the certification of the election that he lost because he believes he didn't lose it. That's all this is about at this point. This is reputation saving. Look, this is going to come back. Can you imagine that anybody in the Republican infrastructure is going to be like, the guy just said publicly he wants to pardon the people on January 6th because they're being treated unfairly? No one is making an argument that people are being treated unfairly. In fact, if there's any argument being made, it's people saying, I think these folks are getting too much
leniency. Yeah, they're getting off with like absolute minimum sentences.
Yeah. So he's doing this, right? He's landing himself in the spot because he wants to say any prosecution of January 6th activities is unfair. Mm-hmm. Why? Because he's worried about these people going to jail or having a felony on their record? No, because he's worried that it's going to land close to him. The other thing he said yesterday in a written piece is that the reason that Congress is trying to pass this Electoral Count Act is because Mike Pence did have the power to stop the certification, and they want to change that power. They want to remove that power. So he's saying if Mike Pence had done the right thing, and the words he writes are, Mike Pence could have overturned the election. Mm-hmm. So in a written piece, he says overturned an election. What the big lie says is Donald Trump won the election and the certification is wrong because it's certifying the wrong victor. Overturning an election means the election went for Joe Biden and they want to change it and overturn it so that it goes for Trump. Mm-hmm. If you believed the big lie, Donald Trump, you wouldn't call it overturning the election. You would say the right results of the election should have been the ones that were certified. But he's not even making that argument in this point. In a written piece that somebody proofreads, I don't know whom, but I'm guessing like somebody, either Grammarly alone with him on his iMac or somewhere, someone is proofreading this. And his public messaging now is Mike Pence could have, quote, overturned the election. That's what people mean by he says the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
It's just, and this whole, like, where's the right information? Where's the wrong information? There are times when we just know, I thought Paul Wallace said it so well in our podcast on Friday. If you haven't listened to that one, go back. It's a real treat. When he said, look, at some point you have amount of information and you have the number of people who hold to it held to this idea over time. That over time was, I felt like, a really important piece. How do we know? Well, because over time people get to it. Now, not always, because sometimes time just solidifies a bad idea in place. Like, there is no racism in America. People have been saying that over and over and over for a really long time until it is believed by a lot of people and isn't true. But for the most part, and look, this election, it's been looked at, studied, and over time, 2 years now, people have been looking at this thing, or a year and a half now, people have been looking at the setup to the election, the execution of the election, and then the counting and the recounting of the election. It's not up.
Yeah.
There was never anything not fair about it. Just because Donald Trump cannot believe that 81 million people voted for Joe Biden doesn't make it not true, because we have proof that 81 million people voted for him.
Right. Time and time again, people have confirmed this. Like, Republican-led recounts in all the states that were contested have confirmed again and again that this guy lost.
I mean, the last recount that they did in Arizona, the big one that was going to be the big fraud one that a lot of people were worried about, actually came back and said Joe Biden gained votes.
Right.
The count wasn't accurate by like 8 or something.
And all the election fraud, every case is Trump supporters voting for dead relatives. Like, it's always the Republicans doing the voter fraud.
I mean, yeah, you're right. In the rare cases where that's been found and
like
prosecuted,
6 cases they've found total.
Yeah. And at least a few of those in Florida, funny enough. So I'm glad that didn't come down to hanging Chads again, or this really would become a thing. But this idea that, Donald Trump is famous for having said to Leslie Stahl, who's a reporter, when she asked, why are you so hard on the press? And he said, I'm hard on all of you so that when you write bad things about me, I can say you're just, that you're unfair. Like, I'm just working the refs to make it seem like, so then, and this is a brilliant strategy if what you want to do is misinformation. You say the media is unfair, the media is unfair, the media is unfair. Then when the media says something that's favorable to you, you say, I must be so good because even the unfair media is saying a good thing about me. Then they say a bad thing. You're like, well, that's because the media is unfair, right? That's how you do it. And it's not just Donald Trump that does this. It's not just, podcasters on Spotify that do this. It's all kinds of people. The Christian community has had a tendency of doing this kind of stuff over and over, right? We'll harp on Hollywood. We'll talk about a corrupt, immoral culture. As soon as someone from that community becomes Christian or says good things about Christians, then they're like jumping on it and heralding it up as if these are people worth listening to, and then back to bashing them. So I've just watched this my entire adult life, right? That people kind of work the sides and try to say the media is unfair. And it's just, it is designed simply to reinforce confirmation bias, right? That's what it is. But every day there are people who don't yet have a bias. They're still shaping them and forming them on particular topics, on just all topics, because they're like 14 years old or 21 years old and they haven't thought about these things yet, and now they're starting to, and so they go into the world and they pick up a way of viewing the world. Like it's a complex ecosystem in a country of 350 million people at varying ages on where we are. So this misinformation thing is a very dynamic process that's going on. We shouldn't not talk about it. We should talk about it all the time. Like, news media should hold our government accountable, and citizens should hold our news media and journalists accountable, or all media. And the blending between official media and unofficial media is what? Just how many people listen to it and how accepted it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when it comes to media, there's no standards. It's not like you're a doctor and you have to sign an oath, or a lawyer and you have to agree to certain kinds of behaviors, or an architect and you have a ethical demand in your profession. To be a media person means to point your camera at yourself, turn on your microphone, and start talking. Right? I'm always struck by Arianna Huffington. You know that person, Arianna Huffington. She started a thing called the Huffington Post, and now a lot of us read the Huffington Post. What makes the Huffington Post trustworthy? She just made it up, right? And then hired a bunch of people that people said, oh, I like the people you've hired. I trust them. They used to work over here. And off you go. Now Huffington Post is a famous thing. If the Dan and Doug Post starts putting out a bunch of journalism and we start hiring, people are going to say, I don't even know who you guys are. I don't really care who you guys are. You're whatever you are. What is the media is just how it's responded to. Mm-hmm. If no one listens, no one thinks you're a media force, no matter how official your brand is. Look, if no one was reading the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Herald, they wouldn't have any cachet, and people would say they're no longer really a media force. If 11 million people download your podcast on a weekly basis or a daily basis, that's a significant number of people.
Right.
That's it. What makes it the media? Somebody saying stuff and people are listening to them. That's it. Mm-hmm. There may or may not be standards within some kind of journalism, and some people who've gone to journalism school may feel like they've got a higher calling and the truth is going to be their thing. But that's all a friendly agreement. That has the ethical power of a bowling league, where someone's going to be the bowling team captain, and the numbers that you turn in versus, on how many strikes and spares people got is a really big deal, but it's all done on an agreement. The media is not held accountable to anyone other than themselves and their viewers. That's it. So if you think there's somebody out there who's supposed to have their hands on this, there's somebody out there that's supposed to confirm this, that just isn't how it is. Yeah. That's why we as the citizens have to hold journalism, media, and newsmakers accountable while they hold public officials accountable. That's how the system is supposed to work.
Yeah. It's a little muddy because it's, self-policed in a sense. It's up to us to call out bad media when we see it. And it's up to artists like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and Foo Fighters to say, hey, this is a line that I think we shouldn't have crossed, and I'm going to take my music elsewhere to show how serious I am about misinformation.
Look, I think our podcast is on Spotify, right?
It is, yeah.
I don't even know. Okay, so I think it's on Spotify.
It was until yesterday, and I canceled it out of protest.
Take it down. You think if we were saying stuff about COVID and having on doctors that have been moved off of other social media because they violated the terms of service by repeated actions, do you think Neil Young would have said, hey, on the Monday News podcast, they're saying things that are not accurate, so I don't want to be affiliated there anymore? Oh, good golly, I hope not.
Well,
but you know what else?
Me and Neil go way back. He might have called me personally to.
Yeah, that's right. He would have just said, "Hey, Dan, Neil from Canada." Look, the reason that this is a big deal is because Joe Rogan works for Spotify. Some people have joked, and I know they're just trolling the CEO, but people are referring to Joe Rogan as the de facto CEO of Spotify, that he's the one really in charge because they're trying to tweak at the CEO to step up and to do something more than what he's done.
Yeah.
We just get to put our stuff on Spotify as a free platform that people can listen to for free or pay money to not have ads, right? So just like anywhere else, we're just putting it out there. Joe Rogan was paid $100 million in an agreement with Spotify to solely be on Spotify. He has a deal. They have Spotify has a different relationship with Joe Rogan. So when you're thinking about, do you keep your Spotify subscription versus, did you see that Amazon Music is now offering 3 free months for anybody who leaves Spotify and wants to come on over?
They're on it, yeah.
Which some people are like, boy, that's going from the frying pan to the fire. I'm not going to let Jeff Bezos give me my music. Okay, we can go over to evil Apple.
Like
or
all the platforms are problematic in some way.
Yeah. Okay. So you're going to go find. But the difference is that, no, we're not saying run through and then when Spotify came out and said, hey, look, we've taken down, X number, I don't know what it was, hundreds of thousands of things that they thought violated their terms of service. Well, that means that you actually do take down things that violate your terms of service. And when no one knows what they are, I'm sure that's frustrating to those people who had their stuff taken down. Is probably found by, a bot that listens to reads titles and listens to certain segments. They have ways of doing all that. Mm-hmm. But the reason it's Joe Rogan that they're going after is because not just the size, but because Spotify has said, we have a partnership with you.
Yeah.
Now you have an organization like Spotify, which I think is a Swedish company. Is that right?
I think they started there, yeah.
Oh, they're not still registered in Sweden? They're not a Swedish company? They're a U.S. company?
I'm not sure.
I don't even know. Well, from wherever they're organized and their company operates, they're saying as a corporation in that country, we want to have you as someone that we're in a business relationship with. Once you're in a business relationship, you have a different obligation. When people know that Joe Rogan is exclusively on Spotify, they're now going to have a different expectation versus someone who's like, you can find us on Twitch, you can find us on YouTube, which you should go to the Vote Common Good YouTube channel. You can find us, on Twitter with the live feed there. Like, it's just, we're putting this out on all the platforms. So I'm not speaking of this as if we're jealous that he has more people and therefore Joe Rogan should be quieted because he has more people. I'm saying it's a different relationship. Like when Ariana Huffington puts out a blog post is different than when she starts the Huffington Post and now moves from being an individual expressing an opinion to a news outlet that wants to be in relationship to the other news outlets. Then she's required to behave like the other news outlets. And if not, then she's going to be self-policed by the other news outlets and the public in a way that's different than something that is not that way. Look, if you want to come after Vote Common Good, you're probably best on not coming after Podbean or Twitter or Twitch. You're probably better just telling people you think we're full of malarkey and they shouldn't be listening to us. Sorry to swear like Joe Biden right there. But this is the sophisticated level that I think we have to get to when we want to talk about these things. Right. I don't think anyone should tell Joe Rogan what to say and what not to say. It's just ridiculous. Let him say whatever he wants to say in any way that he wants to say it. But you don't have to be partnering if you're Neil Young, right, getting paid by Spotify, and then the money that people are paying to listen to your music is then being funneled to Joe Rogan. You might just say, I don't want to work here anymore. I don't want to work for you. I don't want to have a business relationship with you any longer because you're not on this. Now, I think Spotify is trying to be on it. I don't know if you read, Dan, what they're planning to do, Spotify, about all this.
No, I haven't.
They're wrong-headed in my view about it. You know what one of their ideas are? They're going to put a warning on all podcasts that talk about COVID.
Just a blanket.
All podcasts aren't the problem.
All podcasts matter.
All pods matter. It like equates the stuff Joe Rogan says with the stuff that the NIH says, because they're going to have podcasts about COVID.
Yeah.
Like, hey, be careful. This might not be true. That's the opposite of what you're saying. Like,
we're going to stick the warning sticker on the Experts podcast as well as the Joe Rogan podcast.
I mean, as a tip of the hat to Tipper Gore, who is the wife of former Vice President Al Gore, she was the one in the 1990s behind putting labels on explicit record albums. I don't know if you know about this. Do you remember that when that whole thing happened?
I mean, I know of the labels, but I didn't know Tipper Gore was responsible.
Yeah. So way back in the day when Democrats were really aggressively trying to have a moral, kind of conservative moral line in their route. Al Gore was actually in that group, much more conservative and morally concerned about things. And so Tipper Gore is one of the people that went before the Senate and had advocated for this labeling that causes all kinds of issues. Basically, what they wanted was for records to have the same labeling that movies would have, right? So R-rated, X-rated, PG, PG-13, whatever it was then. So she's out pushing that. If you think or don't think that's a good idea, I don't think it really matters for this analogy. It would be like her saying, let's put a label on every record that this may or may not have explicit language, right? Like this may or may not be dangerous for you. It would be like, let's not just put warning labels on cigarette packages. Let's put warning labels on everything all that a person puts in their mouth. Yeah. This may or may not cause cancer. Yeah. Like that approach, which tells me Spotify doesn't get where the problem is. Now, should we ask ourselves in a society, are we overdoing it on COVID? Are we overdoing it on COVID? Wrong information, misinformation, and disinformation? Like, are we blaming a part of our media ecosystem for people's belief about COVID that doesn't actually match? Like, is it possible that all people's beliefs are being reflected in these podcasts rather than being created by these podcasts or YouTube videos? Is it people hunting based on confirmation bias, or are their views being shaped? Great conversation. We should be having that conversation. That's a thing we should be up to, thing we should be questioning and looking at. And for whom do we want to put the pressure, and for whom do we not? But look, Spotify, if you want some tips, if you're listening deep into this one, an hour and minutes into this, Twitter knows how to do it. Facebook knows how to do it. YouTube knows how to do it. Like I think Instagram knows how to do it, which is a subset of Meta. So the 3 or 4 big social groups that you're trying, and Amazon knows how to do it, that you're trying to compete with, because that's what they've said their goal is, to compete with those other platforms. They want to compete with Apple. They want to compete with Amazon, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. That's where they want to fight. They just say, here's our standards around health information. Mm-hmm. You can talk about the benefits of B vitamin all you like. You can talk about ivermectin as something people should have. You don't get to say that B vitamins and ivermectin are cures for COVID. Can you say it looks like vitamin D really increases someone's ability to fend off or not be harmed by COVID when they catch it? Sure you can, because that's stuff people are looking at. Can you say ivermectin makes you better? No, because they've determined that it doesn't.
Right.
But this is hard. Look, I mean, it's an iffy thing. I feel like this kind of thing where 10 years from now, we're going to look back and be like, boy, those people were like Tipper Gore putting the warning labels on, explicit music. Like that's where the problem lies, right? That's what parents should be worrying about is worrying about the label.
Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to figure this out in real time, and it's not perfect. It's a little messy. But it's conversations we have to have because real lives are at stake when you put out misinformation about not getting the vaccine or taking horse deworming drugs. Like, people are dying. And so we have to have careful conversations about this.
Yeah, and it really messed things up when the former president of the United States, before he was a failed re-election candidate, was out saying things like, maybe we could put the bleach inside people's bodies because it works on the surface. And, his spokesperson and director of communications, and I think NIH, Birx, just sat there with a stunned look on her face and didn't say, no, Mr. President. Well, that one we can't, but we can talk about this later and I can catch you up. But to everybody else, so they know, no, you don't deal with the lungs the way you deal with the porous surface in your office. No, we can't do that. So this idea that like, hey, we're just spitballing here, we're just throwing stuff out. I don't think anyone's ever picked up. I don't think anybody's Do you remember where you were when he said it? I was walking. I remember right. I mean, I can mark it on 62nd Street and Xerxes Avenue, right where I was walking. I was listening to it live, and I literally stopped, and my head sunk, and I felt my heart rate just start to go up, and I'm like, did he just say, maybe we can put it inside? And then I came home and of course, television, and I got to watch it happen. And I was just like, what is going on? I thought either he's got information that the rest of us need to know about how bleach works that, comes from like the presidential daily brief, or this guy has lost his rocker. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't even get to everything. Didn't even get to the Summer of Soul.
Yeah. Or the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Well, we got, we got next week for Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is still coming.
We do.
Yeah.
And it's going to be good. I haven't cared about football in a long time, mostly because I haven't had like live TV. But the last 2 weeks of football really made me care again. Yeah.
You watched the games?
Yeah. Last week there was like 4 playoff games. Every one of them was incredible. Came down to the wire. Really exciting to watch. And then this week again is really fun to watch.
Yeah, I always wonder about, because especially to a casual fan or to the fans of the team that won in the last second or in the playoff or on the final play. Because of these 6 games, the 4 last week and then the winners of those 2 games, or the 2 games last week and then the 4 games.
Yeah. And then the 2 games this week.
And in the 2 games this week, that of all 6 of those games, like they all came down to like the last few minutes and lots of choices during the game, right? So it made them very exciting. At least this is what I've read from the news and just the little snippets that I've seen. Do you think the people and the teams that lost are like, you know what? Great weekend of football. Just the best. I love it when it comes right down to it. I bet they're thinking, I wanted my team to win in a blowout. I wanted it never to be close. That would have been great football.
Chiefs fans are real hurt right now. They're not having a good time.
Yeah, is there some podcast coming out of Kansas City or out of Tampa Bay, or no, I'm trying to remember where the other people were that are saying like, oh, you know what? Oh, thank goodness for the NFL. Great football. Great football. But to your casual viewer and people who are going to watch the Super Bowl, I mean, now it's just like, okay, 6 for 6 games that came down to it and really seemed to matter, and you could get excited and feel your heart palpitate because of how the mirror neurons work in your brain that cause you to experience something someone else is experiencing. Now we're talking turkey. And so you hope that this game on February 13th is going to be just a rip roarer as well. Because there's a lot of people, I'm one of them, who might watch the Super Bowl even though I don't watch any other football.
Well, it'll be a good halftime show at the least. So,
okay, Trisha is saying no. No fans of the teams that lost think it was great football. That's where she is. All right. Hey, anything else? I was literally just a blinded mind on my ranting today, so I wasn't reading the many.
Yeah, it was an active chat. I couldn't keep up with a lot of it, but thanks for everyone in the chat for hanging with us and having the conversation as well.
Yeah, thanks all. For those of you on Instagram, you're welcome. For those of you on not on our YouTube channel as a subscriber yet, if you would, we still have 350 more people to go. It's a lot. We don't have a very big YouTube channel following, and we need to have 1,000 people, and we have 651. In fact, we're going to launch a little competition. A little giveaway. Not really a competition. You can't really lose. You just might not win. So what's that called when you can't lose but you don't win? It's like a drawing. You didn't lose a drawing. You just didn't win a drawing. So anyway, that's what it is. There's a winner, but it's not a competition. You subscribe to our channel. You post that with a tag on it that you subscribed, with a little photo of your subscription that tells other people you subscribed. And then we put you into a drawing, and we're going to give away a bunch of Vote Common Good swag. We've got hats, not this blue hat if you're watching online, but we've got a Love Beyond Borders hats. We have Vote Common Good hats. We have buttons and stickers and shirts and stuff that has been part of our of our work over the last couple of years, and we'd love to give you a little bit of it. So we're going to have a 1 in 5 winners. So we're going to break down all the people who subscribe into 5 groups, and then we're going to have a drawing, and maybe it's a sticker, bumper sticker, maybe it's a house sticker, maybe it's a magnet, maybe it's something else. So head over there, gather up your friends and families, call your aunties and uncles and tell them to get loaded up too, because we want to send you some stuff. You imagine somebody calling their uncle and being like, "Hey, Unc, I need you to go over to a YouTube channel and subscribe to it." That'd be awesome.
Do what you got to do. Yeah.
Yeah, we'd love it. All right. So anything else, Dan?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right. Well, tomorrow we'll be on Talk Politics, as if we didn't today. All right. See you all, everybody. Then.